In the late summer of 1944, in the town of Mattoon, the streets were quiet. The windows were open, the air was heavy with heat, factory smoke, and the low hum of a country still at war. Across America, families huddled around radios, listening for updates from Europe and the Pacific. Men were overseas. Women were working, waiting, worrying. Every newspaper carried reminders that the world was dangerous, and even small towns were not immune to fear. But in Mattoon, the fear was about to take on shape, not in the form of an invading military, and not a saboteur. It was really not something anyone clearly identified. Just smell, a strange, sweet smell that drifted into bedrooms at night, followed by sickness, panic, paralysis, and the terrifying belief that someone was standing just outside the window. Welcome back to Legends May Live, where we explore the strange, the mysterious, and the downright eerie. I'm Drew, and today's story is one that sits right between the explainable and the unbelievable. But before we get into it, just a quick note that while our stories are based on true events, sometimes sources conflict and details get skewed with time, so just take it as entertainment. Near the end of August and the beginning of September 1944, one family woke up in the middle of the night to a strange smell in their house. Then another, and another. The descriptions were similar, but never exactly the same. Some said it smelled sweet, like cheap perfume. Others said it was sickening, chemical-like smell, almost like gas. But no matter how they described the smell, soon after it arrived, the same symptoms followed. Nausea, coughing, burning in the throat, weakness, and unnerving heaviness in the legs. Some victims said they couldn't move at all, and that detail, more than anything else, turned the story from strange to horrifying. Because it was one thing to wake up sick, it was another to wake up sick, paralyzed, and convinced that someone had done this to you on purpose. One of the most famous early reports came from a woman named Elaine Kearney. On the night of September 1st, 1944, Elaine was home alone. Her husband Bert was a taxi driver, so he kept odd hours, and that night he was out driving, which was something that Elaine had come accustomed to. Like most others in Mattoon, in the heat of late summer, she had left her windows open to try and let a breeze in to cool down her home. But around 11 p.m., she noticed an odd smell. It was like something sweet, but she couldn't quite pin down what it was. At first, she thought maybe it was flowers outside the window, but then the smell got stronger. It moved from odd to overwhelming as it filled the room. She's trying to figure out what's causing it, but all of a sudden her legs started to feel strange, like they were getting heavy. And then they got weaker and weaker until finally they started to go numb. And at this, Elaine was starting to panic because whatever this was, it wasn't going away, it was just getting worse. Elaine yelled out for her sister, who was also in the house. And her sister woke up and rushed to come help. And as she got to Elaine, she's checking to see, did she fall? Is something broken? Like, what's happening here? And as she's checking out her sister, she noticed the odor too. It seemed to be coming from the direction of the bedroom window. And as the women assessed the situation, they realized maybe Elaine's issues were due to whatever was causing that smell. Like maybe someone was somehow attacking them. Maybe someone had stood in the dark and released something into the room while Elaine lay in bed. And so they called the police for help, but when they arrived, the police checked out the area, but there was no clear evidence of an attacker, and there was no obvious source of the smell, and no device that someone could use to carry out some kind of chemical attack. And there was just no prowler waiting in the darkness. All the police really found was a terrified woman, strange smell, so all they could do was recommend the women shut the windows, and if anything else happened, to call them back. Then around 12:30 in the morning, Bert Kearney returned home, and up to now, he had no idea what had happened while he was gone. This was 1944, so it wasn't like Elaine could just text him what happened or even give him a call. And so when he got home, he wasn't on high alert. this was just another day, but as the house came into view, he noticed something odd. Near one of the windows, outside the house, he could see a tall man dressed in dark clothing, wearing what looked like a tight fitting cap. And Bert got out and chased him, but the figure ran off into darkness and escaped. The rest of the night was uneventful, but after all the details came together, that image, the tall man in dark clothes slipping away into the night, it became the face of the entire mystery. Before long, Mattoon had a name for him: the Phantom Anesthetist, the Mag Gasser. The newspapers took the story and ran with it. Headlines warned that an anesthetic prowler was on the loose. Suddenly, what had been one family's terrible night became a town-wide threat. It became the whole focus of the town. News was everywhere. People read the details over breakfast, they talked about it at work, they repeated it in grocery stores, on sidewalks, in front yards, and over telephone lines. This was a big deal. A woman had been attacked in her own bed and in the strangest way possible. Someone had set an unknown gas through her window. Her legs had gone numb. She had become paralyzed for a moment. A shadowy man had been seen fleeing the scene. This was horrible. And if it had happened to her, it could happen to anyone. Over the next several days, more reports came in. One person smelled gas but didn't get sick. Another did fall ill. Another claimed their legs became weak. People woke up coughing. Some felt nauseated. Some said their lips or throats burned. Attacks seemed to only come at night, when families were most vulnerable, and that made the fear so much worse. Because at night, every sound could be a threat. In everybody's mind, a bush moving outside the window became a person crouching in the yard. A creak on the porch became a footstep. A passing smell became evidence of poison. Mattoon was a town on edge. And what made the panic so powerful was that nobody could agree on exactly what was happening. Some victims saw no one and never heard anything unusual. Others swore they heard someone outside. Some believed the attacker used a spray gun or some kind of chemical device, and others could only describe the odor and the symptoms. Police searched yards, alleys, porches, and windows. They followed reports and investigated suspicious figures, but every lead seemed to just dissolve. There was never a captured suspect, never a clear weapon, never a confirmed trail that explained everything. The Mad Gasser was everywhere in people's minds, but nowhere when anyone tried to catch him. Then came the strangest pieces of supposed evidence in the case. On the night of September 5th, Carl and Beulah Cortez returned to their homes on North 21st Street. Near their screen door, they found a small white piece of cloth, about the size of a handkerchief. Beulah picked it up and smelled it, and as she was examining it and put it up to her face, she almost immediately became violently ill. It was like an electric shock passed through her. Her mouth and her throat burned, her face swelled up, and she started vomiting. And for a town already afraid of a phantom attacker, this seemed like proof. Maybe the gasser had left something behind. Maybe this was part of whatever he used to distribute the chemicals. Maybe the cloth carried the poison. But even then, certainty was still just out of reach. Authorities tested evidence, investigated claims, and searched for explanations, but the case never really became clean. The more reports came in, the harder it was to separate fact from fear. And some incidents seemed disturbing, while others seemed questionable. Some symptoms could have ordinary explanations, and some odors may have come from spilled household products, animals, or industrial fumes. But to the people of Mattoon, ordinary explanations were not comforting. They were insulting. They were dismissive. During the day, people still went to work. Factory whistles still echoed through the streets. Storefronts still opened. Children still rode bicycles down sidewalks. But underneath it all was tension, a feeling that something was wrong. Conversations no longer started with weather or war news. They started with questions like, Did you hear about the latest attack? What street was it on? Did they actually see him? What kind of gas was it? The story had become unavoidable, and once the sun went down, Mattoon transformed. People began locking windows that had once stayed open all summer long. Porch lights stayed on through the night. Husbands slept with baseball bats near the bed. Some kept firearms close at night. Neighbors watched from behind curtains. Every strange sound carried weight now. A dog barking in the distance could send someone to the window. Footsteps outside became suspicious. Shadows seemed to stretch differently at night. The entire town had become hyper aware, listening for danger that might already be inside the air itself. Police phones rang with new sightings and fresh alarms. A stranger walking at night could become a suspect. A noise in the yard could bring someone running outside with a flashlight or a weapon. And in every part of town, the story just grew. The Mad Gasser was not just a person anymore. He was more like a phantom. He was the thing that might be standing in the dark while you slept. The thing you could smell before you could see. The thing that could enter your home without opening a door. And maybe that is why the case became so terrifying. And not because the attacks were deadly, they actually weren't. No one actually died or even suffered permanent injury, for that matter. But the gasser violated something more basic. The feeling that your home is safe. The belief that your bed is a place of rest. In Mattoon, people started going to sleep wondering if they would wake up unable to move, or wondering if they would smell the sweet chemical odor drifting across the room, wondering if just beyond the curtains something was watching. The attacks left behind little physical evidence. Victims recovered quickly. Some reports appeared to have simple explanations, but saying that publicly was dangerous because to the people that lived through it, the fear was real, the sickness was real, and the panic was real. And whether the Mad Gasser was a man, a misunderstanding, or something born from the pressure of a town already stretched too thin by war, Mattoon was now caught inside the legend. Each night brought the possibility of another attack. Each morning brought another story, and somewhere between the strange odors, the frightened witnesses, the newspaper headlines, and the shadowy figure in dark clothes, the truth began slipping further and further away. Was there really a madman moving from house to house, spraying gas through open windows? Was Mattoon being poisoned by fumes from a nearby industry, or had fear itself become the attacker? For the people of Mattoon, those questions didn't matter when the sun went down. Because once night settled over the streets, once the houses went quiet, once the windows turned black and reflective, there was only one question left. Would the Mad Gasser come back? The police department found itself overwhelmed. Calls flooded in at all hours of the night. Reports came from every direction. Strange smells, sick family members, shadowy figures near homes. One caller claimed someone had sprayed gas through the bedroom window. Another reported a man crouching near the bushes. Others described prowlers moving through alleys before disappearing into darkness. Officers rushed from house to house, chasing fragments of fear that rarely led anywhere concrete. And each unsuccessful search only deepened the mystery. Because if the Mad Gasser was real, he was somehow slipping away every single time. Descriptions of the suspect continued to vary. Some witnesses claimed he was tall and thin, others said he was shorter and broader. Some described dark clothing and a cap, others mentioned shiny objects or strange equipment. A few people believed he wore some kind of military style gear. One report even described a figure carrying what looked like a garden sprayer. But none of the descriptions lined up perfectly, and that inconsistency slowly began raising questions among investigators. Was there truly one attacker moving through Mattoon at night, or were frightened people beginning to interpret ordinary sights through the lens of fear? Meanwhile, newspapers continued feeding the story. Headlines warned citizens to remain alert. Articles described the phantom anesthetist terrorizing the town. The media attention transformed Mattoon from local disturbance into a national curiosity. And suddenly, newspapers outside Illinois were reporting on the strange attacks. Readers across America learned about the mysterious figure prowling through bedroom windows with paralyzing gas, and with every article printed, the fear inside Mattoon seemed to grow stronger. Then came a dangerous shift. Citizens stopped fearing the Naggasser and began hunting him. Groups of armed men started patrolling neighborhoods after dark. Some walked streets carrying flashlights and shotguns. Others parked near reported attack sites, hoping to catch the prowler in the act. But fear has a way of distorting perception. Innocent people began drawing suspicion. Strangers walking home at night were questioned. Random figures glimpsed in the dark became possible suspects. At least one traveling salesman found himself under intense suspicion just for being somebody that no one really knew. And yet, despite all the fear, something strange continued bothering investigators. The attacks themselves remained inconsistent. Doctors examining victims noticed that symptoms varied widely from case to case. Some people experienced nausea, others reported that temporary paralysis, and some claimed burning sensations in the mouth or throat. A few seemed like their only symptom was that they were scared, like nothing was physically wrong with them. But there was no clear pattern that pointed toward a known poison or gas, and there were no lasting injuries, no deaths. And perhaps more importantly, no physical evidence proving that any anesthetic agent had ever actually been used. One local newspaper editor named C.C. Chamberlain eventually published an article that would become one of the most controversial moments in the entire case. In the article, Chamberlain suggested that the attacks may have been a result of mass hysteria. According to his theory, fear itself had spread through Mattoon like an infection. He said that the first reports, amplified by newspapers and wartime anxiety, may have caused scared citizens to misinterpret ordinary smells and sensations as evidence of an attack. And then, once people became convinced the mad gasser existed, every unusual odor suddenly carried a terrifying meaning. And to many residents, this article was insulting. It was a slap in the face. People who believed that they had been attacked knew that they were not imagining things. They had smelled something, they had become sick, and they had felt the effects firsthand. Some had seen figures outside their homes with their own eyes. The fear they experienced had been real, whether investigators could explain it or not. And then there were other theories too. Some suggested that industrial pollution may have played a role. Mattoon was a manufacturing town, and nearby factories used chemicals that could produce strange odors or even have mild physical reactions. And perhaps certain fumes drifted through neighborhoods during humid nights, causing irritation and panic. Others believed that there truly had been a prowler, and maybe a prankster, maybe someone mentally unstable, whose actions sparked a larger wave of hysteria afterward. And so they thought maybe the mad gasser had really existed briefly, attacked a couple of times, but then fear kind of just spread and the rest was mass hysteria. But regardless of which theory people believed, one fact remained impossible to ignore. The attacks eventually stopped. No dramatic arrests came, no suspect confessed, and there was no final confrontation, no hidden lab discovered, no clear explanation of what had been happening to the citizens of Mattoon. Instead, the reports just sort of faded away, and newspaper attention slowly drifted elsewhere, and the terror that once gripped the community seemed to dissolve back into ordinary life. But mysteries like this don't disappear cleanly. Long after the headlines faded, people continued debating on what really happened during those strange weeks in 1944. Some remained convinced that a real attacker stalked the town under the cover of darkness, and still others wondered if it was a case of government experimentation on its own citizens. Others believed the entire episode revealed how fragile the human mind can really become under pressure. Wartime stress, exhaustion, fear, rumors, suggestion, all of that just mixing together until an entire community became trapped inside its own nightmare. And maybe that's why the story still survives today. Because the mad gasser of Mattoon forces people to confront an uncomfortable possibility that fear itself can become contagious. And that once panic enters a community, it changes how people see, think, smell, and interpret the world around them. A shadow becomes a prowler, a household odor becomes poison, a sleepless night becomes evidence that something evil is outside the window. Or maybe there really was someone moving silently through the streets. Maybe somewhere in the darkness between those small Illinois homes, a man stood beneath open windows, holding a strange device while frightened families slept only feet away. The truth is that nobody knows for certain, and perhaps that uncertainty is what keeps the legend alive. Because even now, decades later, the story leaves behind the same lingering question that haunted Mattoon every time the lights were out and the town fell silent. What if someone really was out there? There are still details that refuse to disappear cleanly. Witnesses did report seeing figures outside their homes. Some victims smelled odors before even hearing about the earlier attacks. Either way, eventually life did return to normal. Windows reopened, patrols stopped, the newspaper lost interest. But legends don't survive because they're solved. They survive because something about them continues scratching at the human mind years later. And the Mad Gasser case scratches at something deeply uncomfortable. Because whether the attacker existed or not, the panic absolutely did. And the entire town became afraid to sleep. Families sat awake listening for footsteps outside their homes. Citizens armed themselves against a threat nobody could prove. Neighbors distrusted strangers. Fear altered behavior, perception, and daily life. In many ways, the Mad Gasser succeeded regardless of whether or not he was real. And maybe that's why this story feels strangely modern. Even now, people spread fear rapidly. Rumors travel faster than truth. Anxiety moves through communities like electricity. So what really happened to Mattoon during those strange weeks in 1944? Was there truly a man moving silently through the neighborhood, poisoning? Or were there industrial fumes accidentally poisoning residents? Did wartime exhaustion, sensational headlines trigger one of America's strangest outbreaks of mass hysteria? The truth is, no explanation fully answers every detail. We may never know the truth. That's it for today's episode of Legends May Live. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the story, please remember to like and follow. It helps a lot. Until next time, keep your windows closed, because you never know if the Mad Gasser will strike again. Because legends may live.